Back in Vietnam, I buried my best friend with my own hands. Now, decades later, I was holding my granddaughter's screaming hand out, and suddenly, I realized I was just a burden in my own daughter's house. I swear, the world has a cruel sense of irony. My daughter, Kara, her husband, Scott, and their perfect little suburban life, apparently, there was no room for a worn-out Vietnam vet like me. I'd come to help with the baby while recovering from a nasty slip on the porch steps, and the welcome mat was sarcasm and side eyes. "Dad, can you just sit over there? You're scaring the baby," Kara said, her voice tight like she'd swallowed a lemon. I froze, mid-step, and for a moment I thought I'd misheard. "Scaring the baby?" I echoed, letting the words hang like a grenade. I fought for a country that I bled for, and now I'm scaring my own granddaughter? Scott snorted. "She's fine. You just, talk about stuff she doesn't understand." "Stuff I don't understand?" That's rich. Apparently, serving in a war they despised made me some sort of ghost in my own family. I felt a familiar heat in my chest, the anger I thought I'd buried with my medals. Later, as I sat on the faded recliner, the house buzzing with the dull roar of baby monitors and weekend sitcoms, I realized something terrifying. I didn't belong here anymore. Not in my daughter's life, not in the house I once helped paint, not even in my granddaughter's first memories. And yet, I couldn't leave. I called my son, Mark. My boy, my army brat, the one who actually understood discipline, sacrifice, and the smell of sweat and gunpowder. "Dad?" His voice, calm but wary. "You sound tense." "I'm not welcome here, Mark. They treat me like garbage. I don't know what to do anymore." There was a long pause. Then, "You won't be invisible for long. I'll help you, but you have to trust me." I don't fully know what he meant. But the promise, like a spark in dry grass, set something alive inside me. Something I hadn't felt since I got off that chopper in '72, anger mixed with a strange, thrilling sense of possibility. As I hung up, Kara leaned over from the couch, cooing at the baby, her eyes narrowing as she said, "Dad, if you don't behave, I swear." I cut her off with a slow smile, low and dangerous. "Oh, I'll behave. You'll see. You'll see." And I meant it. I just didn't know how far I was willing to go. That night, while everyone slept, I started scribbling names, dates, grudges, little notes, little plans. And by morning, I had my first move. I told myself my first move would be small, nothing cinematic, just a reminder that I still existed. I started with the things they treated as trivial. "Do you need help with the laundry?" Kara asked the next morning, like she expected me to fumble and sentimentalize. I watched her, the baby asleep in the sling, Scott packing for work. They moved around the house with the kind of practice distance people use to avoid thinking about difficult things. I took her receipt from the counter, folded it, slipped it into my pocket. It was petty. It was necessary. "You want coffee?" I asked, voice even. She blinked, annoyed. "I'll make it." At the bank that afternoon I watched routines, who smiled, who checked the clock, which teller left a drawer open for a breath. I wasn't there to steal, I was there to study patterns. Old habits die hard, scan, wait, measure. I left with nothing but a map of normal behavior. Back home I started doing small things that rattled the house. Keys in the freezer. The remote tucked under a cushion. A favorite t-shirt swapped with another from the laundry pile. Little invasions that would make them blame themselves, blame me, or blame chance. Anything to tilt the equilibrium. When Kara discovered the keys, she accused me in front of the baby. She said, "You're getting worse." Scott looked at me with that casual pity that feels like venom. Later I heard Kara whisper into the phone, "We should look into a place." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. I laughed softly then, an odd, surprised sound. They expected theatrics, panic, tears, pleading. I gave them none. I gave them calculation. I spent nights reading pamphlets about elder rights, leafing through legal jargon until the sentences lost their edges. There was power in paper, forms that would keep me in place, clauses that would stop them from selling what I'd saved, a line here, a signature there. Knowledge felt like revenge without venom. I phoned Mark. "They're talking about a facility," I said. His answer was flat and steady. "Good. They're impatient. We'll use that." So I became an irritant, not a crisis. I misfiled a warranty card here, left a bill to be found on the kitchen table there. Nothing that would justify an emergency call, just enough friction to make Kara and Scott hurry and make mistakes. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Lane asked twice if I was okay. The teenage babysitter said I seemed off. Their curiosity meant the household gossip circuit had started, and gossip is a poor ally to secrecy. I practiced how to look harmless, the slow blink, the apologetic smile, the way to tilt my head as if I'd forgotten what had been said. But inside, I planned. Mark sent cues, short, precise. "Be patient. Don't explode," he said. Then the night I was rifling through the kitchen trash, looking for receipts, for anything that might help me understand how deep their ledger of lies went, I found Scott's crumpled tax file. The paper smelled like cheap coffee and sweat. My hands went cold. This wasn't small. This was open, raw, and it had teeth. The tax papers mentioned an offshore account. I'd never heard the word in my house before. I couldn't sleep that night. Not for the baby crying, not for Kara muttering about Dad being difficult, not even for Scott snoring through what I now realized was sheer arrogance. My mind kept returning to that crumpled tax paper. Offshore account. Hidden funds. A lifeline they thought I'd never find. I peeked at it again the next morning while Kara scrambled eggs for the baby. "You're obsessed," she said, rolling her eyes at me like I was some quirky old man. I smiled faintly. "I'd just like to know where my money is," I said. She didn't get the joke. The first real move was subtle. I started leaving notes, check the pantry, or look under the couch, but in the handwriting of someone else, not my shaky script. Kara would find them and panic, thinking she mislaid something, or worse, that she was forgetting things. Scott muttered about being tired, stressed, confused. The friction grew. I sat back, pretending to knit, watching it bloom. Mark called late that evening. His voice was calm, clipped. "You've got their attention. Now test them. Make a mistake they'll notice." So I did. I accidentally spilled coffee on a folder marked important. Kara shrieked. Scott came home, yelling at me. "Do you have any idea what this is?" I just shrugged. "Just a folder," I said. The panic in their eyes was sweet, but it wasn't the main course. By the third day, the house was unraveling in small, almost imperceptible ways: groceries placed in the wrong rooms, phones missing chargers, a toilet handle left loose. Every minor inconvenience was a calculated ripple. The kind of chaos that plants doubt and paranoia. Kara whispered to neighbors about my confusion, and I could almost see Mark smirk through the phone line. But there was danger. One afternoon, I caught Scott watching me from the doorway, jaw tight. "What are you doing in the garage?" he demanded. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, then slowly turned, hands empty, palms up. "Just fixing my old toolbox," I said. His eyes narrowed. For a second, I thought he might figure it out. Then he grunted, walked off. The tension left my shoulders in a trembling release. Yet the offshore account lingered in my mind like a promise. I couldn't access it directly, too many lawyers, forms, security measures, but Mark reminded me, we don't need access yet. We just need leverage. And so I started observing. Every bill, every late-night whisper, every small mistake they made. The cracks were appearing, and all I needed to do was widen them carefully. That night, while the house was quiet, I heard it, a strange hum of an envelope sliding under the door. I opened it to find a letter addressed to Kara, and it mentioned me. Something that could change everything if used the right way. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and smelled faintly of wax and old paper. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded it. Inside was a formal notice, Kara's name, the family trust, and a line that made my stomach knot. Any mismanagement or concealment of assets may result in immediate investigation and penalties. I read it twice. 3 times. This wasn't just paper. This was leverage. A chance. The next morning, I placed it on the kitchen table, carefully angled so Kara would notice first. Her eyes locked onto it like a hawk. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, voice sharp. Scott hovered behind her, arms crossed. "I don't know," I said, slow, deliberate, harmless. "It was under the door last night." They whispered, eyes darting around, tension coiling in the air. And I smiled. Oh, I smiled. Over the next few days, I stepped into the shadows of the house. Nothing overt, just quiet movements, moving papers, slipping reminders, dropping tiny hints. Kara grew frantic, calling Scott in whispers from the bedroom. "He's messing with the files? I don't know what he's doing." Scott, predictably, was all bristling pride and denial. "He's old. He's confused." But even he was checking twice, locking drawers, triple-checking forms. The grip of paranoia tightened around them. I spent my afternoons talking with the neighbors under the guise of casual greetings. "Did you hear about misplaced checks at the bank?" I'd murmur. Small seeds planted. No one knew what to take seriously. Everyone wondered if I'd cracked. Mark called each night. "Good. Patience, Dad. Push just enough. Watch their reactions. We don't need to be greedy yet." Then came a small victory. Kara accidentally left her laptop open while rushing out with the baby. Emails to financial advisors were exposed for a few seconds before she realized. I glimpsed names, numbers, a pattern. That's all I needed. That night, I reflected in the dim light of my recliner. I thought about the Vietnam jungles, heat, fear, waiting. Waiting was everything there. Waiting was everything here. I realized something. This wasn't just revenge. This was teaching them something they'd never learn willingly. But as my eyes closed, my mind racing with strategy, I heard it, the soft creak of Scott's footsteps outside my door. He paused, listening. I froze under the thin glow of the hallway light, heart hammering. He whispered something I couldn't quite catch, then retreated. But the next morning, a new rule appeared taped to the fridge: no more access to papers, mail, or finances. The game had just entered its most dangerous phase. The fridge notice hit me like a slap. No more access to papers, mail, or finances. Kara's handwriting, scrawled with righteous certainty, screamed control. Scott nodded along like a proud general enforcing a new rule in enemy territory. But I smiled behind closed eyes. Rules are only as strong as the person enforcing them, and I knew where their cracks ran. I started small. Not with money, not with emails. I began with routines. The coffee machine, set to brew at 7 a.m., was subtly delayed. The baby monitor, I moved an inch to the left, enough for the sound to crackle. Little things. Petty to anyone else, but to them, it was chaos wrapped in normalcy. Kara snapped at Scott over minor mishaps, blaming exhaustion. Scott responded with irritation, and the tension grew like a storm cloud. One afternoon, while helping with the baby, I asked Kara about the offshore account casually. She froze, eyes widening for a fraction of a second, then masked it with a laugh. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." I let the comment hang, nibbled on a biscuit, smiled faintly. Let the doubt fester. Mark called that night. "They're stressed." Perfect. Now we escalate. Use the letters, use the slips, force mistakes. You're invisible until they panic. So I did. The next morning, I accidentally knocked over a stack of bills. I left one of Kara's emails folded in a way she'd notice, letting her see just the subject line, urgent, offshore transfer review. Her eyes went wide, she muttered something about accountants, and I chuckled quietly to myself. Neighbors started noticing my eccentricities. Mrs. Lane said I seemed more alert than usual. The teen babysitter whispered, "He's different." Different indeed. I felt alive again, like I'd slipped back into the jungle, but this time the enemy was in a house, not a forest. But not everything went smoothly. One night, I miscalculated. A document slipped too far behind the cabinet. Scott discovered it while checking the house for Dad's mistakes. He held it up, suspicious, jaw tight. I swallowed, kept my smile tight. "Just recycling," I said. He narrowed his eyes. For hours after, I lay in bed, heart racing, realizing how close I'd come to exposure. That misstep taught me a lesson. Patience was my weapon. Subtlety was my armor. Brute force would ruin everything. Then, 3 days later, a package arrived at the door addressed to me, not Kara, not Scott. Inside, a single envelope with one line, "They're hiding something bigger than you know." The envelope trembled in my hands. One line, black ink, no signature, "They're hiding something bigger than you know." My mind raced. Bigger than the offshore account? Bigger than petty lies and taxes? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I pretended to be my usual, slow-moving, slightly forgetful self. Kara poured coffee, muttering about my energy spike yesterday. I smiled faintly. Energy? Patience, my dear. That's what they'd never understand. I started watching them closer. Not overtly, just gestures, small habits. Scott's phone calls grew longer, hushed. Kara checked the computer screen over her shoulder like she expected me to appear from nowhere. Little tells, tiny cracks in their perfection. Then I saw it, a ledger hidden behind a row of books on the shelf. Thick, leather-bound, heavy. Scott's handwriting. Kara's occasional scribbles. It was a record of every transfer, every expense, every move they thought I couldn't follow. I took it with me to the recliner. Flipping through pages, my stomach churned. Their greed had layers I hadn't anticipated. Offshore transfers, cash withdrawals, hidden properties. But they'd underestimated me, they'd left patterns. Mistakes. Opportunities. Mark called as if reading my thoughts. "Found the map?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "And it's worse than I imagined. But there's a trail, they can't hide everything." We started planning. Not a direct attack. Not yet. Observation. Manipulation. Let them trip over their own arrogance. The ledger became my Bible. Every oversight, every rushed signature, every casual glance, fuel for the fire. I began subtle psychological moves, a misplaced pen here, a half-suggested reminder there. Kara started questioning herself. Scott snapped at her. Arguments flared over nothing. Each fight left a mark. And I watched, quiet, almost invisible, savoring the tension. But danger lurked. Scott caught me looking at a page one afternoon. His eyes, sharp and suspicious, met mine. I forced a cough, smiled weakly. "Just checking the weather online," I said. His gaze lingered. My heart thumped. Close. Too close. That night, while I sat under dim light, Mark's voice crackled in my ear. "It's time. Plant the first domino. But be careful, they'll smell it if you rush." I knew then the real game was about to begin. And once the first domino fell, there would be no turning back. The ledger sat before me like a loaded map, and I knew the moment had come. The first domino. A single, precise nudge, and the whole structure of their deceit would wobble. I waited until Kara left for a last-minute baby appointment, and Scott was glued to a game in the den. Perfect. I slipped into the office, careful, slow. My hands hovered over the ledger, memorizing pages. Then I made my move. I took a small piece of evidence, a copy of a bank transfer they thought was hidden, and left it conspicuously in the kitchen, open for Kara to accidentally find. I didn't touch anything else, just left a trace. Minutes later, I heard the panic. Kara's voice, sharp and urgent. "Scott! Look at this! How could this happen?" Scott bounded in, eyes wide, scanning the paper. His confident facade cracked. "What the hell is this?" I smiled quietly from the recliner, acting oblivious, old, harmless. They didn't see me. I let them argue, flail, panic. It was intoxicating, watching their house fracture over the smallest slip. Then came a knock at the door. Neighbors. Mrs. Lane, worried. "Is everything all right?" Kara froze. Scott stammered. Yes, just a small mistake." I nodded politely, as if nothing was happening. They left, whispering. Chaos plus witnesses. Perfect. I started escalating small manipulations simultaneously. Phones misplaced, bills accidentally shuffled, documents left in plain view. Kara began checking every corner. Scott started double-locking drawers. Each paranoid act made them slower, clumsier, easier to manipulate. Mark called late that night, quiet. "They're reacting exactly as planned. Keep nudging. Don't get greedy." I laughed softly into the dark, remembering Vietnam, the heat, the constant tension. Waiting, watching, striking subtly. This was familiar: strategy, patience, and letting the enemy implode themselves. But the ledger revealed something unexpected. An offshore account tied to a recent large withdrawal. Someone had moved funds without leaving a trail in their household records. Bigger than I thought. I realized that to get to the truth, I would need to confront Scott directly, without letting him know I was already 10 steps ahead. And I had no idea if he'd crumble, or strike back. The ledger had shown me enough to plan my next move, but I knew I had to be careful. Scott wasn't stupid, he was sharp, impatient, and full of bravado. One wrong step, and he'd see through me. But I had patience, and patience was a weapon he never respected. It started with small confrontations. A casually forgotten drawer left open. A comment dropped just loud enough for him to hear. "Funny how some things disappear, isn't it?" Scott's brow furrowed, jaw tight. "What are you implying?" he asked, voice low. I smiled faintly. "Nothing, just memories, I suppose." Kara, meanwhile, was unraveling faster than I anticipated. She double-checked every envelope, every bill, every email. Arguments bubbled in whispered tones in corners of the house. Scott tried to remain the protector, but I could see the strain in his eyes. He was reacting, not controlling. One evening, I struck deliberately. I found a misplaced check that linked to the offshore account. I left it partially hidden, the corner peeking out from under the couch cushion. Kara gasped, panic flashing in her eyes. Scott lunged forward, trying to grab it before she could see. But I made sure she caught it first. The chaos was delicious. They argued, scolded, threatened to call accountants. I stayed in the background, quiet, watching. My own heart raced, not from fear, but from a rush I hadn't felt in decades. The battlefield was here, in a suburban living room. Mark's voice came through that night. "You're doing perfectly. Don't overplay it. Let them crumble naturally. Observe their mistakes, they'll reveal everything." And then came the unexpected twist. Scott approached me while Kara was asleep, voice low. "Dad? I know you're up to something. What did you find?" I paused. The tension coiled around us like a snake. My heart pounded, but I held my composure. "I found patterns," I said slowly. "Patterns of carelessness. Mistakes. Things that weren't yours to hide." He froze. Then, a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. Not fear of me, fear of being caught. His bravado faltered. "That was my window. You know," I added, "truth has a way of catching up." Scott turned and left without a word, but I knew the seed had been planted. Tonight, he would check everything, second-guess every move, and the cracks would widen further. But little did I know, He was preparing his own counter, a move that could change everything. Scott's counterattack began subtly. I noticed it first in the kitchen, bills rearranged, small documents tucked back into drawers, a faint scent of his cologne lingering where I'd been. He was retracing steps, trying to erase evidence, reclaim control. Kara was panicked, flustered, her hands shaking as she tried to keep up with his sudden burst of vigilance. "He's manipulating us, Scott. He's everywhere," she cried. But Scott, ever the strategist in his own mind, waved her off. "It's fine. I've got this." I watched, smiling under my quiet exterior. His arrogance was predictable. He believed he could outthink me, that his youth and impatience would give him the upper hand. But I had patience honed by war, by betrayal, by decades of observation. And Mark was feeding me subtle cues, timing, reactions, patterns. One night, I left a ledger page slightly sticking out of the office drawer. Not enough to be obvious, just visible if someone glanced. I knew Scott would find it. He did. And he panicked. I could almost hear his mind racing as he cross-checked numbers, recalculated transfers, tried to anticipate my next step. I called Mark afterward. "He's reacting," I whispered. "Good. Now watch him self-destruct," Mark replied. The psychological warfare escalated. Scott grew paranoid. He accused Kara of mistakes she hadn't made. He double-checked files I hadn't touched. He even started questioning his own instincts. The stress was visible, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, muttering under his breath. Kara, meanwhile, was a mess of anxiety, lost in her own fear. But I made a miscalculation too. One evening, a small pile of documents I'd forgotten moved too far. Scott discovered it before I could redirect his attention. He raised his voice, and for the first time, I felt fear, not of him, but of exposure. I kept my cool. "Just organizing," I said evenly. "I don't want any trouble." But inside, my pulse raced. Mistakes could undo months of careful planning. The next morning, I noticed Scott whispering into his phone in the garage, urgency in his tone. Whatever he was planning, it was big, and it could either destroy him, or me.